Hello, Janksters, and welcome to another edition of the MagicJank podcast, the weekly Magic the Gathering show where we discuss kind of the latest happenings, as well as taking one of the things that we've kind of fallen into that I absolutely adore is talking about the current metagames in various formats and seeing where things go. So, this is your place to stay up to date on what's happening with Magic. So, my name is Graham. I go by Hammocks42. I am joined by the one and only Damien F16. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great.
He's back, everybody.
It's the Pro Tour this weekend. Everybody's excited, and there's lots to talk about this week as usual in Magic. So I'm excited. I'm doing well. How are you, Ham?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. Definitely looking forward to it. I know we're gonna have a good conversation as always. And in general, I'm pretty excited right now. It's weird. With the summertime, it's usually kind of downtime for Magic, but I feel like the last week or two, things have been interesting. It's been fun.
Moving and shaking.
I know, right? And then we also have the one and only HollywoodPizza. Pizza, how you doing, bud?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Time to get the jank on.
You know it.
Talk about some awesome stuff today. I'm doing pretty good, man. Had a pretty good day. The last couple days, I've been kind of like bombarded with all this bulk that we got at the store. Probably like
bombarded with bulk.
Probably about legitimately 50,000 cards.
So you bought some lots or what? You bought some collections?
Yeah, it was. We bought one big collection. And it had a lot of really cool stuff in it. I got some really cool stuff that so I'm actually not gonna have a green screen in the future. I'm actually gonna have like some cool stuff like some posters, some magic books, things that I bought out of the collection, and
cool.
That's definitely gonna be really, really cool in the future. But yeah, they just had like a little bit of everything. Like I said, they had some books, they had some posters, they kind of just had like cards, obviously, and they just had like just so much stuff like binders. They had like the original Magic the Gathering deck box. If any of you guys have ever seen it.
You mean from what set are we talking about?
Just the actual original deck box made by Wizards of the Coast. It's literally it feels like a ceramic deck box. It's like this deck box, I guess, from like the 90s that Wizards, mass produced.
Made themselves. Weird.
Yeah, made themselves. It has like engravings inside that says like, Wizards, Magic's a trademark, all this stuff. Like, cool. It's pretty cool. I never seen a lot of this stuff. I actually saw like this Kamigawa poster that was just like unreal, where it was like all the old characters like Urza, Karn, and some of the other people, and then like it showed like Champions of Kamigawa, and I was like, wow, I don't remember this poster. I was like, wow, that's like pretty cool. That when we went back to Neon Dynasty, like the same thing that originally happened in Kamigawa happened again. So just really, really cool, like Magic lore,
That's one of those things that's super sweet. I don't know how many people out there have ever purchased a lot of cards, like I don't mean a large amount, but just someone's lot that they're just like, this is one price here. Take the whole lot of cards, and maybe there's some money in there. I can't be bothered to like sort it myself, kind of thing. I've done that twice. Once when I was living abroad, and it was crazy. Just the dream. You're trying to hope to find some money card that this person overlooked or whatever. And the diamond in the rough.
we actually went through all of it. Like we went through every page in the binder.
Jeez.
I was going through a lot of the bulk. The guy kind of knew where like some stuff was, and then like someone else was kind of like taking care of like the other stuff. So like it was like pretty crazy. I've never done a buy like that. Like usually I'm the guy that buys all the cards at the store,
right.
And it was just really cool that we all kind of like did as like a team effort, and we knocked it out in like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And the guy was just like really impressed. He was like, "Holy crap! Like I didn't expect you guys to get this done so quick." Yeah. We're just used to it. Like we run through a lot of cards.
We're sick people. We love Magic that way more than is healthy. That's why.
Yes, that is actually true. Yeah. Just another day in the office.
Just every Magic player knows.
All
right.
Love it.
It's not
content creation and MTG.
Heck yes. Yeah. No, so
speaking of which.
Yeah, so speaking of, so before we kind of get into the meat of what we want to talk about today, which, I'm always on board for whatever tangents we find ourselves on, to be honest. I think it's lovely. That's what long-form podcasts are about, right? But before we get into those tangents, I want to give a huge shout-out and a huge thank you to MagicJank.com, the namesake of the podcast. They make this possible. We're all members of the streaming team, MagicJank, and it's a lovely company to be a part of. I'm really proud to be, part of this group. And MagicJank.com is a website where you can buy and sell Magic the Gathering products and gear, but it's more than that. We do have a stream team as as well, as I mentioned. So feel free to check us out over on Twitch. It's a relatively small group for now, but it's a pretty elite group, if I may say. I think it's really cool. The
quality over quantity. All
definitely,
right?
I love it.
That's what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so yeah, definitely check us out. We're also going to be attending upcoming events. Like we have a number of us who are going to be going to MagicCon Las Vegas. You'll be able to see us by our very bright blue and yellow kind of gold jerseys. They stand out in a crowd, and we're all going to be walking around with those on, and we're going to be there getting games in, shaking hands, taking selfies, whatever you're into. We would love to see you. Please come find us.
Oh yeah, it's the best time. Like I think if you've ever attended like an old Grand Prix or any of these Star City Games events of the past, I think that the MagicCons are actually better than that. I think that you can still play these competitive tournaments that are still there and available, but on top of that, you actually get to meet all your favorite content creators. Content creators like us get to kind of like network and hang out with other content creators and kind of like either talk about what we do or kind of just enjoy the time that we actually get to meet a lot of our peers, and we all kind of like look up to each other, and I think a lot of people kind of like forget that, and it's kind of like cool to kind of get a little bit more like humbled and kind of like appreciate like being around so many awesome people and being able to take like Magic in at like probably the highest like level, it feels like, where you're just like part of like this really big thing, like it finally feels like this game, it just kind of gets summed up in one event where everything's there. It's like, oh, here's like a big money tournament, or here's the Pro Tour, here's like all the cosplayers, we have all the artists, obviously both of those are like amazing. We have like all the players that want to play the competitive events, then we have the side events, and then it gets even lower to like the EDH tables, right? We have the command zone now, and then obviously there's other tables that are set up for people to play. So I mean, there's just a lot of just magic happening, and it's just a really, really incredible experience, honestly. I think it's way better than the old tournaments, like, for sure.
Yeah, and I remember going to the old GPs and stuff, but you're absolutely right. The landscape is shit. There are way more content creators out there. So there just wasn't that many before. Now you've got people straight up guerrilla streaming from the event all over the place, and it's like, and it's kind of cool to see people that you see every day on Twitch. There's some people that hang out in my channel every single day. I love them. And you guys as well. Many of them are in all of our channels. And to see them and maybe meet some of them in real life, really, like what you said, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, just getting to meet these people in real life, reminding yourself that these are actually like all humans that you interact with online, despite it being so faceless a lot of times. It's
surreal
cool,
because normally you meet people in real life and you're like, oh, I met them. But when you talk about your friends to other people, like, at least for me, I'm always like, oh yeah, my online friends, and
people that
like when I got to meet Ham, it was like insane because like I still remember meeting Ham for literally like the first time ever,
Sorry,
like
it was
3 in the
amazing,
morning, but like, being like, oh, hey, like I just came over from like this raid. What's up? Like I mod over at Ultima Ratio stream. And I just remember like all this really cool stuff. And I think it's just so cool to really, you're right, just take it in with like your fans too. And like just people who have been there for you for like a long time and really actually make this worth doing is those people. And it's just really, really incredible.
Yeah.
All right,
absolutely.
Let's stop shooting our own horns. We're great. Everybody's great. we love our community.
MagicJank.com. Thank you so much for making this possible. We appreciate you. So, but yes, so we're going to be talking more about events going forward as they approach. So you're going to hear more about those. But today we actually wanted to get started with some of the Doctor Who cards. So at this point, we've seen a handful of the cards that are going to be included in that Commander product. And not only are they going to be included in Commander Precon decks, but they're also going to be releasing them in booster packs as well, which, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time that we're seeing them treat these Commander Precons almost like its own set, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, which is, it's funny because I thought that was kind of weird when I first saw it, but then I also kind of took a step back and thought about it for a second and realized, I didn't have the intention of buying like a full Warhammer 40k deck, but if I could have picked up a couple of booster packs and just got a handful of those cards, I wouldn't have been mad at that because that's kind of fun. So they're giving us that opportunity with the Doctor Who set, which I think is actually, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think you're right. And it's a way to get the wider community to try it when normally most people go, Doctor Who? ? Like, what?
Literally,
what
Doctor Who.
Why why am I buying this now? Like, so I would never buy but then I open a card in the pack and I'm like, oh yeah, time travel. Yeah, okay. You got my interest peaked. Like, can I jam this in a commander deck?
I'm
Yeah,
interested
yeah.
here. Yeah, can I time
Let me
travel
Google
in Commander?
what does time travel do? Yeah.
Well, and I suppose actually another angle on it from a Wizards marketing perspective is there are casual fans of Doctor Who maybe have never played Magic before, who now all of a sudden, with like Warhammer, for example, okay, great. There's this new product over on this other game that is branded with your favorite thing, but if you want it, it's going to be like at least $40 to buy in. I think a lot of Warhammer players would probably look at that and just go, I mean, you guys have fun, enjoy, but I'm not gonna invest. Whereas with Doctor Who, it's like if big time Who fans, all of a sudden paying a handful of paying a little bit for a booster pack just to have a couple Magic cards and maybe open your favorite Doctor or whatever is the rare. Cool. It could be a fun little
Speaking
novelty.
of Doctors, our first card that we actually I think saw on Twitter, now known as X for those of you out there who keep up with the cool kids. But anyways, so we have some cool cards that were shown here on Twitter, and I really enjoy the 10th Doctor. So
10th Doctor.
It seems as though Wizards has found the solution for every main character in these universes beyond, and that's make it Is It. Just make it the most popular two-color combination ever outside of Rakdos. We can't print good Rakdos cards because everyone hates Rakdos. So we gotta make them Is It. We gotta make them Is It.
And if they're good enough, then we can all start hitting Grixis. Anyway, that's...
So I mean, there's a couple words. You guys are gonna have to hold my hand on this because I don't know how many Doctors there are. This is the 10th. Is there 10 different?
Listen, Damien, there's a lot more Doctors to be shown.
There are a lot more Doctors. I think there are 14. Right. So I'll be honest. I'm not a particularly big Doctor Who fan. I'm a very casual Doctor Who fan at best, and I fell off a number of years ago. But after the revival, they started with the 9th, and I think they're on like the 14th now. Like it's like I want to say the 14th or 15th.
So I'm not sure how many are going to be in. Do you think they're going to have a bunch of them in here? This is the 10th Doctor, and the card is literally called the 10th Doctor. Is there going to be a cycle of Doctors that's literally like the first Doctor, the second Doctor, the third Doctor, the fourth, and like all of them are going to be individually? Really? 14?
They easily could. I think a number of the characters are. I think when it comes to the different Doctors, certain ones are more popular than others.
Yeah,
they were on the show for longer, or they had more iconic episodes. And like there are a handful of Doctors. Like I know there were a couple of times during the 10th Doctor's run when I was watching more thoroughly, where there were a number of like times where they would do flashbacks to some of the classics, and they would show like clearly people who were the Doctor. I had literally never seen an image of these people before in my life. It's like, okay, was that like the Doctor 3 or something? Like, okay, great. Good for you, buddy.
Like, Doctor 3, Revenge of the Time Traveler.
Son of the Doctor. Exactly. Yeah.
Son of the Doctor 3.
I just think like this Doctor is the 10th Doctor. Is there something special in the lore about the 10th Doctor? Is he special in some way? Or is it just, maybe it's going to be like the Guilds of Ravnica where they have like, this is the 10th one. Is it? Maybe the 9th one is Selesnya. Maybe the 11th one is...
Which is funny because the 9th one would definitely be Rakdos, but
yeah, the 9th one actually.
Okay,
he was intense.
I don't know.
Anyway, he's got black in him, no question. But anyway,
I can agree with that 100%.
No, but they might do that if they, because honestly, they do. There are enough of them where they easily could have. They could easily do that.
14 card cycle.
These sets are like perfect for Commander. Like it's literally like we're just gonna give you like 20 to 50 new options in as like commanders or like staples. It's like kind of insane like how like they've hit each one of these sets out of the park. Like I'm telling you, I praise the Warhammer decks so much, like every podcast, but the Warhammer decks are like incredible. They're like really good. The Lord of the Rings, like arguably one of the best sets ever. And then we could expect this set to probably knock it out of the park too, right? For like
more than likely
the fans' sake.
Let's see. Let me jump in. So what do we have for mechanics here? We've got Allons-y, which is whenever you attack. Is there any other cards with these? No, we've gotten almost no spoilers here, right? So we don't really know.
I think it's Alons.
We've seen like half a dozen cards at this point. Like we haven't seen many, so we don't know. But these I believe are flavor words, just like they did in like AFR. Right. So we're probably not likely to see other cards that have these same words on them.
I mean,
Yeah.
allons-y is a French word, like let's go,
Yep.
let's move, let's
Oh
go.
man, I didn't know that.
Timey,
Oh man.
yeah, but timey-wimey is what?
Oh, that's a made-up
just
Oh, I
nonsense
love
for the
that.
show.
I
Yeah,
love
nonsense.
that. I love
Okay,
that so much. That's
timey-wimey.
like one of my favorites. That's awesome.
Yep.
So
Well,
if
I
we,
find
if
it
we
funny
jump
that that's
over,
on the 10th Doctor too, because I'm pretty sure the 9th Doctor coined that. But whatever. Anyway.
okay, the lore, the Vesu, or what are they called? Whovians. The Whovians
The
are gonna come out of
Whovians,
the
yes.
woodwork
I
and
don't.
correct,
Yeah, but
Watsy.
I'm that guy who's like, I don't really know Doctor Who, and then I'm just gonna drop a ton of Doctor Who trivia as
So,
we go.
but hold on, you chose that version of the art. But if we jump over to
Yes.
the actual like version of the art with
Mhm.
the reminder text, we see that time travel on this card means for each suspended card you own and each permanent you control with a time counter on it, you may add or remove a time counter. Then do it the number of times that you've traveled, time
Yes.
travel. So in this case, 3 times.
Mhm.
So when time travel once, you would add or remove from a permanent you control. So you're not able to really mess with your opponent's stuff here, which is
No.
unfortunate. Seems like time travel would be, you could probably mess with anybody, but in this case, it's just your permanents, right? So
Yep.
yeah, interesting.
Or cards
How
you
powerful
control
is that?
that are suspended. Yeah.
So in a narrow kind of like suspend deck or something, maybe.
Yeah, I think that this is
yeah.
gonna like solidify suspend, because suspend is already kind of a little bit like fringe on its own.
Mhm.
There's not enough
Right.
like actual support. Like time spiral was definitely revolving around it, but I think suspend was more of like a limited ability, like one of those archetypes that you draft, but not necessarily something that you see in standard. I know that there were definitely cards that we saw, like Ancestral Vision was like a really powerful card, but I think that it's going to be so. I think that these decks are going to feel like very like cannibalized, kind of like each one of the universes beyond decks have been, where this deck's going to work really well with all the cards that are going to be in it, or like this set's going to work really well with all the cards that are going to be in it, but
Mhm.
maybe like suspend in general isn't going to be like the most busted thing, right? So it pretty much just makes like what could be like the best possibility for suspend decks, but it's not like it's going to be like the new,
Right.
the craziest
I
thing,
just
but
wonder,
it's still really cool,
yeah, it is cool. I wonder, just outside of the pre-con, can you use this in a suspend deck that's already like,
Yeah, you
Commander?
can.
There's
Yeah.
enough cards in
Yeah.
Magic with suspend
Yeah.
that you can maybe abuse
Totally.
this. Like
Yeah,
how
definitely,
good
yeah.
is time travel,
No question. Yeah, if you're in a situation where you already have, say, like a Joyra of the Get to Suspend deck, you could totally
Right.
slot this in.
Yeah.
Maybe make it an alternate commander, although Joyra, I think, is probably going to be better.
Right.
The thing about it as far as like power level goes, this reads to me like actually a very low power commander. And that's not necessarily bad, because the thing is, if it is self-contained, what you're getting is a 3/5 for 5 that when it attacks, you suspend your top non-land card with 3 counters. You can then
Yeah.
pay 7 to remove those counters. So the idea is, I think, that you attack multiple times, get multiple things suspended, hopefully have some other
Right.
like native suspend cards that are suspended, and then you just rip the timey-wimey and you just vomit them all onto the field. Is kind of the idea, right? Like that's my reading on this. But the thing is, if you're looking for power, why would I not just run a Tali Primal Storm?
Yeah, or any number
That just
of other.
free casts
This
the
is just
top
way too
things,
expensive.
like-
seven mana to cast.
Yeah.
The thing that
You just
could
probably
get
want to
for
play
free off any
control though,
number of
right?
cards.
Like your deck's a little
Yeah.
bit more
Yeah.
like a mid-rangey control with like a lot of mana rocks,
But
and so like that
Well-
way you have like enough mana to kind of suspend stuff early.
Yeah.
And whenever it's about to go off, you can kind of like juice up, double up your mana or something, and then start knocking everything off of suspend. Or like some cards suspend for 1, so you can like suspend it for 1, use maybe like your mana rocks, your mana, and then just immediately cast the card. Maybe like
Sure.
a card that would normally take like 6 or 7 turns. It's just like, all right, I'll just spend 8 mana and get the effect. And maybe it's just like an absurdly powerful effect, but you wouldn't get it
Yeah.
otherwise outside of like a suspend. I'm not really sure. In all honesty, 7
Yeah.
mana is a lot.
But that's the thing.
Yeah.
So at the end of
I'm
the
not
day,
really sure.
I love this card, and I think it is excellent for the game. I do not think it is competitive. And I want to be
No.
clear on that. If we're,
So, yeah.
we're entrenched players who are trying to find like the optimal ways to win. That's the way that we approach the game. This is big and splashy, and it has potentially someone's favorite actor in the art. You know, like big David Tennant fans can now have him leading their commander deck. And this has some big splash potential. You know, there are going to be times where you dump 7 mana into this and you just cast 3 8-drops that were suspended. And you feel like you just, like you're untouchable. Granted, that's going to happen 1 out of every 100 times you play. But as a new player, that one time, oh, that's awesome. You know?
Yeah, and I mean, there are people who design their entire deck to do stuff like that. Like, that's what when I look at a card like this, the first thing I'm doing is trying to evaluate, okay, like, this looks like a cool card. Obviously, the deck it comes in is going to be synergistic and built to kind of abuse this stuff. But does this card randomly have application elsewhere? And then I immediately started thinking, well, Commander, sure. There are probably cards that can abuse the suspend stuff, but this for 7 mana is probably not doing it there. So really the only place this is going to see play outside of that precon, you know, just people keep their precons intact and just use them to battle each other like dual decks, is if somebody really wants to make a Doctor Who themed deck, and then they'll want something like this. Or like you said, they love Doctor Who, the art, David Tennant being on the art or whatever. Yeah, so it's interesting, but I've got to be like super wary. Every time one of these casual cards comes out, I'm like, I have to read it 5 times. Read the reminder text. Just make sure I'm not, because this is these are the cards that break legacy, initiative. I mean, you know, what was it? The Merfolk. True name Nemesis, you know, just random,
the oldest of the bunch.
Every once in a while, they'll print some commander card, and it's like, oh, great, this thing is just insane in a one-on-one game, as opposed, you know.
I think Rick used to get played too from The Walking Dead. I think in the beginning, I think people were trying it, because I think Death and Taxes was like insanely popular. So like, you can just like cast Rick and kind of just give everyone +2/+2 off like an Ether Vial, and it's like.
So one of the things I'm curious, I'm always looking. But I don't think that exists here. I think we're all on the same page. This is a casual niche kind of deck building card. Cool, flavor-wise, great, but not going to show up in a bunch of commander decks and be awesome.
Definitely. So we actually got some other cards too. So we had the Tardis itself, which is a card that, well, you know, a thing in the show that's, you know, very well known. Essentially, the time travel device that is used. I'm actually kind of...
It's a phone booth.
It's a phone booth, yes. And if you're, and
it's
that
an
is
old
where
timey
Bill got the idea.
Yeah, the TARDIS essentially takes image and shape of things that are most common wherever it goes. So when it went to you know, where the Doctor Who is set in, it essentially took over like the phone booths. But I'm actually.
The reason that this one is the phone booth consistently, I believe, is because the one that our doctor that we're following, or the doctor, his TARDIS is broken. And like it is like stuck as like the 1960s London phone booth. And so no matter where he goes, that's what it looks like. But that was kind of their cloaking mechanism, was designed to just blend in with whatever was around him. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
So I'm actually surprised though that this is uncommon. I'm wondering if we're going to see different versions of each card, just like we saw for Lord of the Rings, where we saw an uncommon, a rare, and a mythic.
The fact that this is not legendary already makes me think that that's absolutely true. You're going to have multiple versions of TARDIS almost certainly here. Otherwise, it would be legendary. There's only one, right? In the show, it's the one. He doesn't have a bunch of time traveler machines that are all, you know, different things, are they? Wait, don't answer that.
Well, they all have a TARDIS.
He only has one, but other Time Lords also have TARDIS.
Yeah, each one of them has their own TARDIS.
Anyway.
So
right. So there's 14. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, but there's a whole other time. Anyway, there are.
That's why I'm like,
anyway,
don't answer. Okay. Got it. Never mind.
Now we're starting
to get
more. Too far.
So what about
I don't want to
Exterminate?
go anywhere, I promise. Anyway,
this is the kind of card. So Exterminate is the kind of card that could actually be something that people play in Constructed, perhaps, or maybe this could actually be a real card in Commander. I don't know. Do you see a Dalek deck or?
Yeah, I think this is the real deal. I think the Dalek maybe could be a deck where it's kind of like the Necrons. I think it was from Warhammer. I think that was like the mono black. So I think that it's going to be like really, really good overall. And it's going to be a removal spell that is going to get played quite a bit, I think, in Commander. So I definitely expect it to show up and be like a powerful card. I mean, it's really good with shapeshifters. So
you mentioned that. That's
we'll see if it's good.
And for the folks listening, Exterminate is 2 and a black for a sorcery with destroy target creature. Its controller loses 3 life. And you can replicate it by tapping an untapped Dalek you control. Replicate being a variant of Kicker, where you get to copy it for every time it's replicated. So in this case, if you have multiple Daleks down, you can simply tap them, and you get multiple copies of Exterminate on the stack, which could get really out of hand really fast.
Yeah, like you mentioned before, though, I mean, it being a sorcery is rough. I mean, that is a big knock against especially a removal spell. The difference between an instant speed and a sorcery speed removal spell is big.
Huge.
Draw spells or other types of spells, maybe not, the gap isn't so big, but you know what? Yeah, that is super powerful.
This
I mean,
could
if you
be,
can play
though,
wind,
like, yeah, you could play win the board. Yeah, if you got like 6 creatures out, you play this. And you just tap all 6, and you destroy up to 6 creatures.
Well,
it's like,
the tricky part is 6 Daleks. So how do you give all your creatures 1 creature type? Now we've got to resort to things like, what was the one you were just mentioning?
Masco Nexus, Nexus, Arcane Adaptation, Conspiracy. I think is the
Ham knows all of them. Yes,
I mean I use a lot of I have a
was it
ninja
Kindred
deck.
Discovery?
I need all these things. Okay,
is one of them? I can't remember. Kindred
go.
Discovery might be one.
Kindred Discovery cares about creature type. It doesn't bestow creature.
Okay,
types,
it doesn't
though.
give it. Okay, I can't remember.
Yeah, there's Zeno. What is it? There's a really bad 5-drop version.
Okay.
That I'm blanking on right now.
Ham is friends with the Daleks. He knows all the copying.
Arcane Adaptation and Masco
Daleks.
Nexus are like the 2 big ones that like. But to your point though, like we can talk about ways to like grant Changeling and make sure we have Daleks, but at the end of the day, we haven't seen the rest of the deck. Maybe there are cards that just create Dalek tokens. Maybe Daleks are kind of a swarm style.
I think it's going to be like the
creature type,
Necrons from Warhammer. I think it's going to be the real
insane.
deal. Yeah,
I think the question of how powerful this is comes down to how many Daleks is the deck producing. If the answer is a lot, then holy cow, this is going to get insane. The other implication here that I adore to the point where I want to build around it is if your opponent has an indestructible creature, you can stack as many copies of this as you have Daleks targeting that creature, and all of them will resolve. But the destroy effect simply won't happen. And so your opponent will lose 3 life for every instance of that. So if you have a bunch of 1/1 Daleks, you can just turn them all into lightning bolts to your opponent's face.
Nice.
I think that's fun. So that's the kind of nonsense I'd like to do with this. But yeah, in general, you're right. It's effectively a plague wind in the right if the board is set up to support it. But your board is tapped then. And so you're not going to be able to attack after killing all their blockers. And
then again, at least they won't be able to attack you because ideally you blow away all their attackers.
All their creatures are gone, yes. So barring haste enablers, you might be fine there. So but
looks interesting.
I think it is more expensive than it looks. It's probably still worth it, but I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see how many Daleks.
It seems really powerful. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a pretty ridiculous removal spell. It kind of there's already a lot of cards that are like 3 mana to destroy up to like 2 creatures. There's a double black and colorless like Spiteful Malice maybe. It was from like Invasion Block, and then there's also I think Undaunted. Maybe that one's called like Undaunted Malice. I can't, or maybe it's Reckless. I can't remember, but that one costs 1 less for each opponent you have, and you destroy up to 2 creatures. I think it is. So like, I think that this card is almost a little bit better than those. It's just not like you guys are saying. It's not an instant speed. So maybe like the fact that you get to blow up like 3 or more creatures, maybe that really has more of an appeal than just blowing up 2 creatures, right?
I think it would be too good at instant speed, to be honest. I mean, can you imagine having a bunch of untapped blockers and then they just like you get to exterminate at instant speed, just go replicate, tap, like blow a bunch of stuff? That would almost be, I can see why it's a sorcery here, but at the same time, just give me Toxic Deluge done. That would be my black removal.
Tough to argue.
But that's an expensive one. So here's a cheap alternative, maybe. Yeah.
There you go.
I like it.
Yeah.
More flavorful.
Well, and it's limited to 1 creature type. So it's probably not gonna like of all the cards that we're talking about, some of these are gonna increase in in price over time. This one I don't imagine, unless the Daleks become the new slivers and everybody loves them. I don't anticipate the price on this ticking up at all. So that's nice.
What about the rest of the lands? Look good. There's Plane Chase. Do you guys do the plane thing? There's some planes here.
I used to play in the past a little bit. I have all the Plane Chase cards from the precons of March and Machine, so I'll be I'm probably gonna get all the precons for this and probably buy some boosters. So I'll definitely have all the plane chase cards, as long as they come in the precons. And I'm gonna be definitely be trying to throw down some plane chase. I mean, it's actually like really fun. It's kind of just like having this universal enchantment out that you don't have to spend mana on, and you get to kind of like change it up every turn, or change it up every once in a while, and it usually has like a really powerful effect, and it's a blast. Honestly, like Commander, I really like Commander already, and this is like special Commander. It's kind of like a Mormir Vig. You guys ever play Mormir Vig?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
It
and
kind of like
I've
has
played
that
Plane
feeling
Chase.
to it,
Yeah, it's good. It definitely adds a nice element to the game, like a variance, change things up, and it can really flip things on their head when so certain decks pull ahead or whatever. It gives other decks a chance to escape and kind of turn the tables back on the winning deck, and it's cool.
Yeah. Well, and I think flavorfully it's a slam dunk. It just makes perfect sense because the entirety of Doctor Who is all about visiting different points in time and visiting different planets that we've never seen before. And so like the characters and like the creature features are all very iconic, but the locations also are kind of a big deal. And I think
These
Plane
lands
Chase
are
Planes
so
just
nice,
makes sense
like,
as a way of representing those. So yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. And the
I
basics
can't get
look
over these
cool.
arts. Like these arts are so insane. Like I feel like they just find a way to just be like, all right, the next set's gonna have the best basics ever.
All of them.
All
every
right,
set.
and then the next set's gonna have the best basic lands ever. Like these
They
are
do
just
look
like
cool.
yeah, they look so like just colorful and just gorgeous. Like if there's like full arts of these, that's gonna be cool. I don't expect it, but we could. Maybe we get like some collector booster.
And then, it's funny you
treats.
mention that because a lot of hubbub is done about the full art, the lands in all the various sets. I mean, they're the big showcase versions, so sure. But the basic, like the normal, cheap, out of the land station or your LGS lands, like all of the art is fantastic on them. It is amazing. Like there aren't any slouches. Like in Magic sets out of the last, I don't know however many years. Like they all look fantastic. And you're right, these ones. Also, I for in which one to pull up for the video version of the podcast, I grabbed one of the planes. I don't know like what art direction came down from WotC, but I feel like in the last year, every set has at least one just jaw dropping planes in it. Why? Like, is that like I don't know. Like, there's the one from Dominator United just showing Karn like walking through the field with all the flowers around. Like, it's just like, it was just breathtaking.
When you said basic planes art, I can't recall a single basic planes in any set that I don't remember. And then you said that, and I'm like, oh, I remember that one with Karn. Yeah, because it was awesome. I remember thinking,
And it was the loading screen on Arena for a while too, because it was just like one of the best arts in the set. So there's like, here you go, guys. Like, thank you. And then there was like, there's obviously the old Eric Peterson Thunder Planes, and there's one from Lord of the Rings that shows Gandalf looking over Minas Tirith. That's kind of reminiscent of it. Like, I don't know. I don't know. Planes art. I don't play White that often, but man, like, I love these planes. I can't get enough of them.
It's the universe's beyond. Like I'm telling you, they hit it out of the park like every time. They got the formula down. It's just like, all right, how much fan service can we put on a Magic card? Like it's so easy to like get away with the fan service because that's like what you expect out of like a card game. So it's just like it's really cool that we're gonna keep going, and I'm so excited to just see. I'm ready for like my Ninja Turtle set. Like I'm ready for like just things everyone loves. Like just so much like
caveat to that is please keep it separate from competitive Magic. Keep it corralled, keep it away from sanctioned play. I'm sorry, every time one of these casual cards makes their way into Legacy, it's a disaster. The mechanics are way too powerful. Some people are like, great, Legacy rotated. It's like, that's not how. And then
I love it. Yeah, I love it.
No,
I love it. I think it's so great. Anyway. It's so great. It's so great. I feel like this is like another like this is like another discussion for a podcast. It's like how how we feel about these cards that have been.
I'll make a note on that.
Yeah. let's not get into that. Let's move on. We've got what do you want to talk about?
There's a lot of cards that were spoiled, and I think that they're all pretty awesome. I think that Wizards keeps knocking all these Universes Beyonds out of the park. So this next set though is a set that we been to before, right, Ham?
Yeah, so the next set that we're going to be going to, we're actually finally getting a standard set again. I feel like we've been talking about all these products, and none of them are going into standard. Well, we finally have one coming up. When actually, like, in about a month, or a little over a month, as of this recording, Wilds of Eldraine It's coming
Gonna
up.
get wild.
Things are gonna get wild.
Is it gonna be more broken, Ham?
Yeah.
Is the set gonna be more broken
No,
than the original set?
It
Okay,
better not be.
let's put something in perspective
what
here.
are
The
we
first
thinking?
throne, the first Eldraine set was one of the most powerful sets ever printed. Now, in hindsight, I mean, everybody looks back on it and goes, okay, when we rank sets in terms of power level, Eldraine's way up there. Like, I mean, in modern, let's say modern day Magic, like since 8th edition forward, something like that, right? Which is the modern format. But go back to Urza Saga or whatever. Sure, Gaia's Cradle and all this nonsense.
Yeah, I think
whatever,
Urza Saga is the only
know,
set that can compete with Eldraine
Then-
because you're
yeah,
Eldraine.
maybe.
You're right. Like you make a very good point that I think a lot of people don't realize, and that's that Eldraine was made in modern Magic time. So the fact that Eldraine is one of the
Right.
most broken sets means that it pretty much like dwarfs
They
so
pushed
much
it.
of like old Magic. Like all the commons
Yeah.
are bangers. Every card's on rate. The adventure
mechanic
cards
is
are
nuts.
just insane.
Yeah,
The
the
adventure
adventure
cards
mechanic.
are just 2 for 1. Every
So,
card's a 2 for 1. Like
setting a stage like that, and we know how powerful the set is, what could they do to live up to those, like fill those shoes, live up to that hype, but also not break the game in half? When that set was legal, Standard was a gong show. They literally had to ban uncommons. They banned
they were
Lucky
banning a
Clover.
card like every 3
That's how-
months.
That's
Like,
how ridiculous
every 3 months a new
Adventure
card would
was.
rotate.
They should have banned the Innkeeper. They should have banned
Oh my
that
goodness, yes.
Innkeeper, but it would have been so embarrassing to ban a common. The last time they had to do that was another one of the most powerful sets they'd ever printed in Kaladesh. Up until Eldraine, Kaladesh was actually one of the most powerful sets in the modern day, era.
I think it's good though when
And-
they ban an uncommon, right? Because like when you ban an uncommon, it's not
Well,
as bad as like the card equity.
the money
as, like, when you
rare.
open like a rare in a pack,
Yeah.
it feels bad. Like I remember in Kaladesh specifically when they banned Smuggler's Copter, it just felt bad because it's like, well, we all have like 8 copies of Smuggler Copter because it was like a $5 card.
I felt
and
that pain
when we
too.
open those
I was
packs,
one of
it
those
sucks.
people.
Like that card's there, and it's just like, oh, this card would be cool if
But-
it wasn't completely
but-
busted, you know?
It's the implication. So basically, yes, you're absolutely right. It feels way worse when my $80 card gets banned. When Meat Hook got banned, I know some people were choked when that happened. But when you ban a common, you're like banning a mythic rare is like saying, okay, this one card, it's it's the flagship card, it's the art on the box, it's the art on the boosters. We really pushed it. Oops. There's Jace the Mind Sculptor, there's Oko or whatever, examples like this. That's one thing. But when they have to print or when they have to ban a common like Edgewall Innkeeper or Attune with Aether back in Kaladesh, because that shows the
Attune with
mechanic
Aether.
itself. The mechanic itself is broken. The
with
mechanic
Aether is
itself
like a dark ritual.
they went way too far. Yeah, Attune with
Attune
Aether
with
getting
Aether is
banned back in
literally
those
a dark
days is a good
ritual.
example.
You get a land in your
Right.
hand, you get 2 energy. Energy
So,
is literally just mana. It's this card's a dark
Yeah.
ritual. Like
I know,
Standard, this
but
card
I'm
was
I-
disgusting. Like
that's what I mean. So when they have to ban the common in the set, because that means the mechanic is so broken. So that means all those cards are way too pushed. That's a way bigger problem than just one mythic. Now you're right, of course, from the player perspective, I hated opening a card that's banned as I'm opening packs of Standard, as I'm drafting and going, oh my god. But at the same time, so let's get back to Wilds of Eldraine here. So they're not gonna push it that hard. They learned their lesson because people hated Standard. Standard saw a huge drop in play. That was right before the pandemic and everything. Tons of bannings, and it was bad. Everybody was complaining about it.
Poor
Oko was-
Oko.
on and
Oko
on and
showed
on.
up and he was
On
literally the
math
thief
and-
of crowns. He was like, you know what? I'm just gonna take this format. This format's mine.
Once upon a time,
you know.
are you kidding? Like that got
Oh,
banned in
you know
Modern
what? Every
almost immediately.
format is
Like,
mine. Actually, yeah. We're gonna play Once Upon a
yeah.
Time.
Yeah.
We're gonna
Like
play Gilded
so
Goose.
anyway,
You know, like
Oko was
Yeah,
those
wild
cards are
too because
broken.
like when they banned Oko out of Standard, his price when the ban announcement was announced, his price would dip a little bit. Then the ban would happen and his price would bump up. Because like all of a sudden what was going on is like the moment he ate the ban in Standard, Modern players were like, oh great, now I can scoop him up. And like they all went after him. And like his price just immediately jumped up again. Like the demand never dwindled for that card. It was wild. Until it was
that card's so
banned
powerful. That's
freaking
like
everywhere now. Yeah.
That is arguably one of the most powerful cards ever. Like that card is like a power 9 level. Like that
You
card
know
hits
how
the
I know?
table and you don't have your own, you lose the game. Like,
a
that's
good
it.
barometer, a good litmus test for a card like this is draft Vintage Cube. If you draft Vintage Cube and it's a first pickable card in Vintage Cube, which Oko is, that's how you know. That's how you know it's busted. It's
You
not
have to
hard.
take that. Like this card's
Absolutely.
insane. This is like literally one
So-
of the most broken cards ever. Like this card made this set. Like this was the tip of the iceberg. It was like, oh my god, Oko's unstoppable, and then you ban Oko, and you're like, oh my god, we have to ban 25 more cards for
Right,
this
so
standard
the-
to be like playable.
Yeah.
The set was too powerful. We can all agree on that. Everybody
100%.
knows Oka's broken. However, the new set, they're not going to do this again, right? There's not going to be another Oko.
I think they're going to do it again. I think that
right?
adventures might be kind of hard to balance. Or so what's going to happen is we're going to have this effect where, so it's the fall set. The fall set is usually pretty good. It has, I mean, when Eldraine was first printed, it was like the best set. So in the fall, we know that there could be like really powerful sets, really powerful cards. In the past couple of years, we've seen Omnath. We've seen a few cards that kind of like stood out a lot. I think that they've said before they wanted to do more adventures, so we're probably going to see adventures. We're either going to see some reprints of some old ones, maybe even some good ones like a Lovestruck Beast, things like that. Maybe not. I mean, Lovestruck Beast was high on power level, so but we know we're going to see adventure cards. So I still think that that they maybe could put some of these cards in there to maybe ramp it up. Like maybe like standard needs more. Like I just feel like Atraxa, like what cards, if they don't print powerful cards, they're gonna have to ban cards, right?
Well,
in standard.
Standard
like
doesn't need more.
Problem.
We just ban 3 cards in standard. We don't need more powerful cards.
But what if Eldraine comes out and it doesn't make an impact, and standard's the same for another 3 months?
Well, that's a whole other thing. And them extending standard a year, this is going to be the problem they run into. That's inevitable. But I think standard, okay, so Throne of Eldraine, I mean, we just talked about how busted the adventure mechanic was. It was so busted they had to ban, where they should have banned a common, and they had to ban uncommons. That mechanic is too strong. You cannot bring that back. What they would have to do is bring it back and change it. It would have to be some modified. It could be maybe it's adventures, but it's like companion. Companion was way too busted, and they literally had to go. Okay, we're going to tag 3 mana onto it. I
mentioned companion earlier, and you know, I think companion is another mechanic they said they want to bring back. I don't expect an all drain.
Say that. Yeah.
I don't expect an all drain because. It's not. I think when I think of companion, I think more like creatures, right? Like,
okay, but I'm not talking about companion.
But I'm just saying, I think that's why we wouldn't probably see it in this. But adventures, I think we're going to see again. But the only reason I say that is because I think that they're just going to make them really overcosted. Like adventures is going to be the draft mechanic now, rather than the showcase mechanic in the set.
They'll tag on.
They've shown that they're willing to do that with adventure. Like adventures were in Battle for Baldur's Gate, Commander Legends 2. And like I challenge you to think of a good, powerful adventure card. That
I don't even remember any of them. That's how much
they were good and limited. But you're right.
Exactly.
They were limited, good, and that's
decent and limited. And you could, if you had an adventure themed commander deck, you got a couple of new toys that maybe you could put in alongside the Lucky Clovers and whatnot. And they were more. They were far more balanced. But you're right. They made them expensive. Like there's a common Sword Coast Serpent. You know, it has Capsizing Wave as the adventure. It's an instant for 2. Return target creature to its owner's hand. It's an unsummon, but it costs 2. It's like, well, that's not
but hold on.
Brazen Borrower at home.
Totally.
But exactly. Brazen Borrower is a rare, or is it mythic? I can't remember.
Mythic, right?
It's
Brazen was one of the chase mythics.
You're comparing a common to a mythic here.
Correct.
These are what the commons look like? Sure, totally fine. What do the rares and mythics look like with adventure? Do they look like Bone Crusher Giant? Do they look like Brazen Borrower? If they do, we have a problem. That is too strong, bro. Bone Crusher is insanely powerful. We can't
can you imagine they
True.
reprint Bone Crusher with Shieldred in the format and Rakdos is just like a tier 0 deck?
Right, but here's a rare from Battle for Baldur's Gate. Illithid Harvester. The sorcery. So Illithid Harvester, sorcery is plant tadpoles. X, blue. Tap X target creatures they don't untap to then controls next untap step. So kind of a super expensive kind of sleep effect. Sure. At sorcery speed, fine. And then it's a 4/4 for 5 with this ability when it enters the battlefield, turn any number of target tapped non-token creatures face down and they're 2/2 horrors. So it's like
it's not amazing.
It's not amazing. Exactly. And this is a rare from Baldur's Gate. This is a rare adventure.
If this is what we get, Baldur's Gate was not like a real set, right?
It was a commander. It was a commander set.
Commander.
Okay.
Commander.
So these are kind of designs.
Commander in Eternals.
Okay, so I think that's maybe this is better in those kind of things, and I can see like the design differences are there, right? I think to make, because remember, if they make stuff like this and they're all duds, that's not exciting either. How can they do adventures where it's exciting and people want those rares and mythics and everything and they're powerful and they don't break it? Like I don't know. I guess it's such a fine line. I don't know.
Them kind of like drilling it into the ground and then maybe something else being broken that they weren't ready for. I think that maybe that's what's going to happen is that they're maybe going to, like you're saying, maybe going to focus too much on powering it down, but then still make like a mistake. The best example is going to be like I mentioned earlier, Omnath to Zendikar Rising. Zendikar Rising, like you guys remember any card besides Omnath? What, Lotus Cobra? That was also played in the Omnath deck.
Scootscore, baby. But
anyway. Scootscore, baby. So Omnath was very polarizing. It's very like lopsided. Like besides that card. the pathways were the most impactful card of that set. Like your rare land cycle was like, oh yeah, it's decent. So I think that maybe in this one, what we're gonna see is kind of like the same effect, where maybe they make a couple mythics, maybe like too overtly powerful, but maybe they're good enough to make new archetypes. And is that something that I think are we all? This is kind of maybe like a little bit of an extended conversation on it, but are we all okay if Eldraine makes 2 new archetypes, but they're really strong, knowing that they make 2 new archetypes and now they can compete with like an Atraxa? Are we kind of comfortable with that, knowing that the power level is still getting ramped up a bit to kind of compete with what's already in? Now, knowing this, we know that the standard was going to rotate and some of these cards aren't going to be in. So I think that we're going to see what happens when these cards kind of like come in together. I think that what do you guys, my actual like kind of question is like, what land cycle do you guys think we're going to get? I personally think that even though the tri-lands are in, I think we're going to get the buddy lands. I think that we'll get like Rootbound Crag, Drowned Catacombs, all these. If we don't get them now, we'll get them in Ixalan. We'll get them in Ixalan where they were last reprinted, which could maybe make a little bit more sense, right? So what land cycle are you guys thinking?
I don't know. I don't know what.
Or maybe it's a new land cycle.
Maybe it's new. Maybe I have no idea.
I hope we see a reprint of Fabled Passage, just because that's one that I think
we don't
have a lot of landfall, stuff going on in Standard right now, but with how many cards we have fetching basics that are like seeing play right now, I feel like that could fit into certain strategies. And it was originally printed in Eldraine, so like, and honestly, it's one of those where like every commander deck out there could use one. So not every, but many commander decks could use them. So drive that price down.
I like the fact that it was printed in Eldraine previously. Anything that was previously printed probably has a higher chance of them going back and either revisiting or just straight up getting reprinted. So Fabled Passage, the castles. Do you think the castle cycle is going to make a return?
Maybe they make new castles, just like in Kamigawa, where they updated
the castles are great, right?
And a Ganjo and stuff like that. So maybe we do see like Castle Garenbrig of the blah blah blah, and Castle Embreth of the or Fallen Castle Embreth.
Dual land castles that make 2 colors. I'd like to see like a blue-black castle or like a black-red or something. But again, we're just spitballing here. Who the hell knows? There's no way to know.
Buddy lands, but they're castles. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Buddy castles. That could be interesting.
Yeah, buddy castles. Yeah, I think that's a really cool. I think that these are all like really cool. Like I think speculations, because I think that like it's always kind of interesting to either like. I think that for a lot of us in MTG, we really connect some things with other things that we have already seen before, right? Like as soon as we see a card, we're already trying to think of what combos are available with the card. Ooh, what deck does this fit in? And as soon as we know like what plane we're going to in Magic, we kind of almost like start to like think about like, oh, the last time we were here, oh, it's gonna be like a gangster set. Oh, I wonder what Streets of New Capenna is gonna be like. Oh, I bet they're saying there's demons and angels. Oh, that's gonna be interesting. And then it's really cool to kind of dive in and immerse yourself with it. And Eldraine specifically is somewhere where we've been before, so we all obviously kind of have like this emotional attachment to it, and it's gonna be really cool. I know I'm excited for it. I like high powered sets, so if this set's high powered, I'm gonna be pretty happy with it.
We'll see. Hopefully
it won't be as powerful, because that's the thing with the original Eldraine. Even the duds were bangers. Like every single card, for the most part, was just like the average
commons
power
are insane
level.
In that set.
The average power level of every card
trash
was just
on most commons in like the last 4 standard sets. Like those cards are so in limited. You can go monocolored, you can go multicolored, you can just do whatever you want. The set was so powerful. Like it's insane.
So my hope this time is that we don't see that. My hope is that the average power level is lower. There can be a couple of standouts. I wouldn't mind if we see reprints of some of the big scary ones that we saw before, within reason. Like Lovestruck Beast is about as lower than that is where I'm thinking.
One factor that we haven't mentioned that I'm thinking about is normally when Wilds of Eldraine comes out, that is the end of our standard rotation. That is 8 set standard going back down to small standard, and that set that comes out at the beginning of that rotation usually isn't crazy powerful, but it's usually more power. It has to anchor the following format, you know what I mean, as it grows to back up to 8 sets. Now, that's changed, of course. Now we're adding another year to standard, but I'm just wondering, nobody knows this, of course, but was the decision to extend standard made before the Eldraine set was designed, Wilds of Eldraine? Because
it's going to be after. Everything is like 3 years ahead.
After, right?
It's 3 years ahead. So by the time these standard cards now rotate, that we know from like Dominator United, Midnight Hunt, all these. By the time these get close to rotation, the actual card development will have caught up to it. So by they could potentially start printing cards that start to deal with the current stuff in the next 3 years.
Did they design the set 3 years ago knowing that they were planning on switching standard? I don't like how far ahead of time did they decide
they didn't. I think they said that they didn't.
That's much more recent.
I think pretty sure they said they didn't know that. So
okay.
A lot of they even said specifically like these cards weren't meant to be played with the cards that are currently in, so we don't know what impact they might have on it, which is why they specifically said in the we're only going to ban a couple times a year. They specifically said whenever a new set comes out, we're going to do a grace period where we kind of see what happens, and we could do like an emergency ban if something's like too good. So they've even given themselves a little bit of breathing room where we could maybe run into an upsetting thing where it's like, oh, maybe they do print this one card that makes this other card that's already in standard broken, and then now they have to ban the old broken card because that card's from a set that's a couple years old and it doesn't hurt as bad. But I think that that's essentially where they're at, is by the time these cards now rotate, all of their player or their card development will have caught up to everything that's in standard. So then they'll be able to kind of make decisions going forward based around what's actually in standard rather than being like a year late or something, or like we talked about Smuggler's Copter, and there was no shatter in that standard, which is why Smuggler's Copter was absurd. There was no duress, there was no shatter, and these were both cards that you saw in core sets. Well, they had kind of toned away a little bit from the core sets, so we saw some of these cards kind of like take over a little bit because there weren't enough answers. And I think that that's potentially something that we could see in Eldraine, where we would hope that Eldraine has answers, but because they're so behind on like the card development, there's not really going to, maybe there's not even a 5 damage kill removal for Shieldred, or maybe there's not, maybe there wasn't going to be an answer to Fable. Maybe there wasn't going to be an answer to Bankbuster. Maybe all these cards were going to run rampant, or all these cards were already so good that you were going to see these cards kind of take over Eldraine, and like I mentioned earlier, Eldraine not really have too much of an effect if it's not powerful enough, which is why a lot of us are hoping it's going to be powerful, because since standard's not rotating, if the set's not powerful, then we're going to be stuck in like this weird lull where standard's like really stale because it's decks we've seen for like a year and a half or 2 years. But again, these sets,
so my point is which you've confirmed, I guess they said, is that these sets were designed with the old rotation in mind. So again, this set was supposed to be coming out and seeing a rotation, and now it's not. So what does that mean for the set's power level and everything? I think it probably is a powerful set. It's probably going to be, because it would have had to anchor the next kind of whatever season of standard or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, these September sets are usually like the flag carriers, right? Like Midnight Hunt
that's what I mean.
Kind of took over when it rotated, but Midnight Hunt's actually not as powerful as the other sets that came after it. It's just that since it was so small, it was like that. So maybe like Eldraine's going to do that, or they're hoping Eldraine does that, where it's really powerful up front. And like you said, it kind of like bridges the gap between, the standard now and then the standard in like February or January, February, whenever the next set comes out, and it balances it out. I'm excited to actually see how that unfolds more than anything, because I'm interested in the 3-year rotation, but Eldraine overall, I'm excited to go back, and at least I think like our general consensus is we're hoping it's kind of powerful to.
You're excited. I have some trepidation. I you can't blame me. I've been playing Magic for a long time. In the last few years, there's been a lot of decisions and things, and they bumbled a lot of stuff. So I'm guardedly excited, but hopefully goes well.
I hear you. Yeah, so we know Ashiok's going to be there. We've seen images of a Goose Hydra, which looks amazing. I don't know what that is, but I want to play with it. The one thing that I hope we see, I want to see crappy Oko. I want to see the return of the character on an unplayable garbage card. That's what I want to see. I want to see like over the hill fat Oko. That's what I want to see. Like, I think that'd be amazing.
An Oko with no
more 8-pack.
Yeah, totally just a washed out uncommon Oko. Like I would love to see that. That's what I want to see. Anyway.
But let's move on. We've got a lot more to talk about here. Let's get on to some actual physical. Well, no, let's jump to Explorer. I was going to say a real format with digital. But actually Explorer,
but a real competitive format. Yeah,
it is real competitive format.
And we've got some tournaments coming up.
Yeah, that's true. This Sunday, July 30th, we're going to have the Pizza Box Open Explorer. It's free to play. We do 3 free to play tournaments a month. It's going to be links down below in the description for you to check that out. And there's also going to be MTG Arena events. So what's actually interesting about the beginning of this next month is that a lot of the events are actually going to be Explorers. So by the time you're watching this weekend is actually the metagame challenge for Explorers. So already there's, a pretty normal arena event where you can maybe farm some packs, farm some gems, kind of, play your favorite Explorer deck, or kind of just like try to find one of the more powerful decks that you enjoy can maybe get you some more prizes and increase your MTGA collection. And on top of that, there's also going to be qualifiers, the qualifier plans, and then qualifier weekend. So all of these dates, August 5th, August 11th, and August 12th, are all also going to be Explorer format. And on top of that, we have a tournament on August 6th, which is also Explorer. It's going to be another Pizza Box Open, so we got 2 Explorer events back to back. That's going to be a good time as well. Kind of doesn't happen as often. Usually we do 2 standard events a month, but for this next month, we got pretty much 2 back-to-back Explorer tournaments. So Explorer is like a pretty... Ooh,
you got a great commentator for that August 6th tournament.
That's true. Yeah, we actually have like an all-star cast. Definitely like some pretty cool pizza slices, if you ask me.
Well, Explorer is awesome, and it's awesome that you offer people, like we were saying on the last podcast, people can get tournament practice for free here, which is insane. So, like, free, to enter a tournament where it's an actual time tournament, people are bringing their A game, they're bringing serious decks usually. So it's kind of awesome. You get this actual real game practice or a real world kind of tournament, vibe in on Arena, which doesn't happen a lot. So getting into the tournament structure. Sorry, I don't know if you were going to let us know anything else there, Hollywood, but I want to get into the metagame. What does the Explorer metagame look like?
So the Explorer metagame is actually very, very like broad. It's very deep. I think that a lot of people really kind of like push it to the side and they feel like it's stale because sometimes a lot of like Rakdos based decks, whether it be sacrifice or mid-range, kind of like show up. And there's also like a few other decks that are obviously, a lot more popular as well, kind of like the control, mono whites, things like that. And in reality, Explorer is kind of like, Explorer is like Pioneer Light. And I consider Pioneer to be close to Modern as well, where we talked about in last week's podcast, Modern is more of like your niche format. It's like, well, how good are you at this deck that you like to play? Or how good are you maybe at the best decks, right? Like you have like whatever you like to play in that format and you get really good at it. And Explorer is like that as well, where in Explorer, like, sure, there's some fringe decks. I go over actually like 25 plus decks. There's 33 actual deck lists in the article, and I go over almost every single deck that you will see in Explorer, and I'm expecting you and everyone who's listening to this and who read it to see in the metagame challenge and some of these other qualifier events. But you have decks like Auras, Celestia Auras, just a random deck that did really good in Pioneer and essentially has been ported over into Explorer. But then there's also the Azorius version of it. And this is a deck that seems fringe, but whenever our good friend Merkin, who's a Pizza Box regular, he's almost guaranteed the top 8 with the deck every time. And so it's really like more dependent on the player knowing like what they like to play and what they're more comfortable with and how good they get at those matchups, like understanding the wide variety of the card pool, everything like that. And like I said, in Explorer, I mean, there's literally like 30 or more decks that, go from tier 1 to tier, 1.5, tier 2, tier 3 and below. And all of them are good in MTGA, right? Like I think a lot of people discount the fact that in MTG Arena, this isn't necessarily like paper all the time, where some of the more best decks, even though like card availability in paper can be an issue on Arena, that's not always the case. Like your Shieldred costs 1 mythic wild card, and so does like your Jank mythic, right? So you don't really run into like, oh, I need to pay $70 for this card. But in Arena, you almost always see a lot of different decks. You might see this one deck a lot, maybe like this day and that day, but overall in Arena, you kind of play against a lot of different decks. And that's something to remember when you're playing in the metagame challenge and some of these qualifier plans specifically. In the qualifier plans, you're probably going to see more decks like the Rakdos mid-range and mono white decks, some of these more serious decks. But in the metagame challenge, you're going to see maybe like a wide variety of decks and maybe a lot of people's pet decks that they're really good at playing. Or decks that they're comfortable playing. Maybe they want to get that 7-0 with that deck. Rather than in a competitive setting, like I said before, you're going to see like these crazy, like the same decks that you're expecting to see, you're always going to see at these competitive events.
Well,
in
those?
These other events? Oh, like my Pizza Box tournaments, like the qualifier play-ins, like these more like high skill testing events.
But what decks are those? What are the decks that are tier 1 in Explorer right now? Because as far as I'm concerned, there is no metagame in Explorer. There's no data. There's nothing. You can say, oh, it's similar to Pioneer. But the real question is, how closely does Explorer resemble Pioneer? It doesn't resemble Pioneer that closely. Even though some of the decks are very similar, even the most represented decks, the ones that are closest to being complete on Explorer, are still missing 1 or 2 cards, whether it's Dig Through Time or Dreadbore in red black, or Oath of Nissa in mono green. I mean, these are the top decks in Pioneer, but missing those specific pieces changes the way they have the matchups work. And also, some of it, like Lotus Field combo, doesn't exist on Arena. You know, certain decks just don't even exist on Arena yet. So how does that affect what would be the top decks in Explorer? They mirror the top decks in Pioneer? It's almost impossible to accurately gauge, right?
Right. So for me in competitive Magic, what's always been kind of interesting is that the metagame is the metagame, and everyone's ready for that. But the things that people have the most problems against is decks that they don't know, right? A lot of things that we've already talked about on this cast, a lot of things I bring up in the article, and just a lot of things that people kind of know in general that we've even been saying the last few minutes is play what you know. And when you're up against something you don't know, then you're going to have a hard time. And these meta decks, you have to remember, these meta decks are tuned to beat other meta decks. So let's say you bring even a Spirits. Like an Explorer Spirits is popular, but it's not as popular as like Rakdos Midrange. So what if as a Rakdos Midrange player, you haven't played enough Spirits and then Spirits blows you out and you're like, how did Spirits beat me? Whereas supposedly, Rakdos Midrange is supposed to have an edge on it. And I can tell you from past experiences that matchup feels a little bit more 50-50, more dependent on sideboarding, on the play on the draw, and more dependent on the pilots themselves, just like any competitive setting would be. So you're right. What's interesting is that Explorer has a lot more broadness and the decks go a little wider in terms of variety, just because these top tier decks can't deal with 25 different decks that I wrote about. Right? Like Rakdos only has 15 sideboard cards. Even if they play one sideboard card for each matchup, they can only go 15 matchups in, so they can't play every card that they need to against some of these bad matchups. So they almost have to throw that out of the window and just say, obviously, it's kind of like Modern used to be, where it's like, all right, I'm just gonna not sideboard Stony Silence, and if I play against Affinity, I guess I'm gonna have to take one in the chin, or maybe I'll get lucky, right? And you just deal with that for the tournament, deal with that for the event, and you just go into whatever competitive event you're doing. You just have to deal with that sometimes, and I think that's really interesting that that's where Explorer is kind of at.
Well, Pioneer and Explorer are a powerful enough format. Let's talk about barometers here. Like when we talk about a turn 4 format, Pioneer's turn 4, turn 5 format. Like most games, decks can kill you on turn 4. There are combo decks turn 4, turn 5, right? So a pretty fast format, diverse format. Yeah, sideboard slots very important because there's lots of different matchups. But the Pioneer metagame is very clearly defined. Like you can list maybe half a dozen decks that are in tier 1. And that's it. Are there all these other rogue decks out there? Sure, but you don't see a lot of those. Like right now, it's the RCQ season for Pioneer, and look at the data, and most of those RCQs and regional championships that are happening, it's mostly the same decks at the top. Rakdos midrange, mono green. They have the lion's share of the metagame right now. Blue-white control, whatever. The list goes down from there. There's Abzan, Greasefang, et cetera, et cetera. But some of these decks, I was like, whoa, this is much more interesting. Explorer, I think, encourages people to step outside their wheelhouse more. I think what you're saying, that there's a wider variety in Explorer, is probably true, because I think most people go, you know what? Yeah, my deck gets hosed by Lotus Field, but that doesn't exist on Explorer. I'm going to jam my pet deck. You know what I mean? I'm going to bring that, the deck that I know and love, the more casual deck that may never survive an RCQ tournament where everybody's bringing actual tier 1 decks. But in Explorer, people are more kind of incentivized to experiment, I think. So it ends up being the case that you're right. You end up seeing more diversity because people are there's the people who are going to play Rakdos minus the one card that it's missing, or mono green minus the one card. Those are the people who are going to make the top 8s most of the time, I think, in Explorer tournaments. But you're right. I think there's probably a wider diversity on Arena in Explorer than there is in Pioneer, just because there's no data and people go, you know what? Who knows what I'm going to face? I'm going to bring my, white-green enchantments deck. Is this a real deck in Pioneer? I can't believe it. It's amazing.
I'm not going to touch on all the tier 1 decks. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a intro to maybe what I'll have out tomorrow as well on MagicJank.com. But right now, for my money, the best decks are going to be decks like Mono White Humans, Rakdos Sacrifice, The Karuga Fires decks are really, really powerful, and they go
Mm.
over the top of many, many decks in the format. And on top of that, I also think that Rakdos Midrange and some of these like kind of traditional Growl Boats, like some of these like traditional mid-range decks are still some of the best decks to play because they're almost just like a pile of good cards, right? Like they're good against everything. And I think that that's like something that when you kind of go into a tournament, besides like knowing what you like to play, I think that, playing something that's kind of like good against everything is also really good. You don't always want to play something that's a little bit too linear, and you go into these formats knowing that you could just lose to one sideboard card. What I actually
Right.
find really, really interesting is that in the data, so a lot of the top decks are actually sitting at around, uh, I think the best tier one deck was like what 53% probably, like the best known tier one
Win
deck.
rate?
Karuga for me is like a tier one deck, but Karuga actually had a higher win percentage. So mono green was at 53%, and then you also have Rakdos mid range at like 52%. So what I actually think about is interesting about this data is that as a Magic player, most of the Magic players' win rate in their life is like 50%, right? Like you juggle around 50%, 60% at the best. And what's interesting is that a lot of data that we see, I got this from mtgmeta.io, which is a phenomenal website that gives a lot of information on metagame analysis. And what's really interesting is that overall, when we see all these decks on all these different websites, it's almost like an aggregate of all these people trying decks. So a lot of the lower win percentages are just going to get thrown in just because this person went on ladder, tried the deck, went like 1 in 10, never touched the deck again. So now that 1 in 10 gets thrown into the data. So what ends up happening is that you kind of almost have like the top decks kind of get drugged down a little bit in their win percentages because everyone's trying these decks out and maybe not doing as good as someone who's knows how to optimally play, like a Rakdos
But
mid range, for example.
But are you talking about data from Arena ladder, like Explorer ladder here?
It's
Is
going to
that
be
the
data
data
from
you're
everything.
referring
It's going
to?
to be ladder data. It's going to be tournament data. It's going to be data from like everything. Like I pretty much got
Mm.
my data from Untapped, which is a program that we
Yeah,
all use,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I also got my data
right.
from mtgmeta.io. So I would combine and kind of get like kind of get a middle ground, be like, okay, 54% over here, 55%. It's 54.5
Yeah,
percent or whatever, and it kind of gives
I
you
don't know.
like it's not the best. It's not the best per se in terms of saying, oh, the win rate. That's why I put the data there, but the data isn't always in Magic. The data isn't always the best. Like, it doesn't
Oh,
paint the
especially
picture,
from
right?
untapped.gg. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
think about
Mm.
the vast majority of players on Arena are not using untapped.gg. Those kind of things are not reliable
Mm.
data. As far as I'm concerned, that data and the mtg.io is the same. They're getting it from the same sources you are. It's untapped.gg. It's
Mm.
programs like that, just like 17 lands. I mean, 17 lands can give you data for limited, but it's based on all the players who use 17 lands, which are usually players who are entrenched players. They're players who play a lot of Magic. That's the only people using untapped.gg are people like us who make content and are very entrenched people, right?
Mm.
So you get a very weird slice of data. It might not be representative at all of the wider metagame. It's just not enough data. It's just too small. There's not enough players who use
That's why
untapped
the
compared
tournaments
to,
are important, right? Like when I have my
yeah,
tournaments and you see what
yeah,
decks did good in the
exactly.
tournament, that's when you know
Yeah,
that this deck is the real deal
that's more
because this deck
real.
just grinded out like 7 rounds, beat all these different
Exactly.
matchups, and has made
128
it to
players.
this long.
Yeah. Yes, that's far more reliable. Is how well did it do in a large tournament? Large being at least 100 or more players, and that's better. So what about the control archetypes? Do you think they're bad in Explorer because the field is so wide,
So
or
I actually think control is really good, but control is always like the player. Like, how good are you with control? You know that as like a control player. Like, you can beat other control players very easily because they're not as good as you at control, and you kind of know how to Jedi mind trick and do all these other things. And I think that Azorius control is actually one of the best decks in the format. But as control is in every format, it's a hard deck to play because you're usually going to go to time, or it's hard for you to build your deck because a format like Explorer is so wide, which is why you don't
yeah,
even see
that's what I
control
mean.
in Modern anymore. But in this format,
Yeah,
even though the format's really wide, Azorius Control still has enough kind of like generic answers that it does really well. A lot of the Azorius
yeah,
lists, what I've noticed is that they're going more towards the Lotus Field, which may be because we
yeah.
saw the Thespian stage get printed in Explorer Anthologies
Just
3.
got released.
But, right. But I think that the Lotus Field deck is actually maybe the better version because tap out control feels better where you're, you know, it's always said like you can have, there's never a bad threat, but there's always a wrong answer.
Yep.
And
Mm.
by playing
More proactive.
more
You're in a
proactive, the
wider
tap out
field.
control,
It's
right?
better.
Instead,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
just
I
like, oh,
agree.
what's scary? I just played Teferi. and your
Yeah.
your opponent's like, oh well, I'm just going to waste all my resources or kill Teferi. Well, then I'm going to farewell and then slam a Dream Trawler, and then now you can't win the game at all because I'm drawing 2 or 3 cards a turn. I play another Teferi. I have Wandering Emperor. I have Settle the Wreckages. I have this card that lets me have an extra turn on your turn because I have 2 Lotus Fields, the discontinuity. So it pretty much is time walks. You get to play 4 main deck time walks, or you also get to cancel out your comes into play triggers. I think that the deck's really, really powerful. It gets to play some of the best cards in the format. I just think that these decks specifically really takes the player. Like you have to be a control player to do good with this deck, which is why that deck sat at like a 48% win rate overall. And that's pretty low still for a top deck, but I actually think that it's not indicative of how good the deck is, just because, like I said, it's just the player. It comes down to maybe
it's
not
easy
knowing
to
the
punt
format.
with that one. Yeah,
well,
very
it's
easy to
punt with
punt.
that deck.
I played a little last week. I played a bunch of blue-white. As soon as that Explorer anthology dropped, I crafted Thespian Stage. I wanted to give that a shot, the Lotus Field version. I was playing with it a little bit before. I was waffling back and forth between the non-Lotus Field version and the Lotus Field version. And what you said is absolutely true. Normally in a wide open, unknown field, I would rather be a proactive deck than a reactive deck where I'm trying to answer everything my opponents are doing. But the problem with the blue-white control deck with Lotus Field, of course, is that you're playing you're playing much worse cards power-wise. Like Strict Proctor is not a good card. It's only good when it's great against your opponents. Like I think in a metagame where there's a lot of like Rakdos Sacrifice, or I don't know, a lot of ETB triggers, maybe the Proctor version is better because you end up actually having this kind of like extra benefit against your opponent's decks. When that's happening, then I really like the Lotus Field version. But like in the mirror, it's the non-Lotus Field version I think beats the Lotus Field version.
What I love this is like a really great point. I think that that's very, very important overall, is to remember that you do have to play some of these bad cards in order to make a deck like Lotus Field work. I think the trade-off is that you're essentially like this weird combo deck that doesn't win the game on the spot, but your deck has enough answers to beat the opponent normally that you don't necessarily always need your combo. Whereas, like, let's compare it to, you talked about turn 4 formats. Well, is it creativity? Is it creativity? Is a turn 4 deck? You can actually play Gear Hulk and get your Magma Opus on turn 4 without even needing the creativity, and you can combo out that way. And I think that it really makes the format like so wide when you have these decks that already have one game plan and can kind of like shift to this other one. And I think that that's what's kind of like important, where like Lotus Field and some of these combo decks are like almost closer together. And you talked about decks that aren't in Pioneer yet. Well, the real Lotus Field deck is actually like a straight up combo deck. And that's not on Arena yet. But overall, I think that that's how I would look at it more. It's like more for the combo sake. I do agree though that you are sacrificing some of your actual consistency in what the regular game plan of the deck is, just to play some cards that make your one land a little bit better. But I think that that's like a worthy trade-off, knowing that when you do hit that much mana, that it doesn't really matter what your opponent plays, because you're always going to play something that goes more over the top.
Yeah, and I've seen the deck have a lot of success recently in actual Pioneer. I mean, the blue-white decks that have been putting up results are the Lotus Field versions. They end up lining up better against, Rakdos Sacrifices just had a kind of a resurgence as well. Maybe that's part of it. But yeah, a lot of the decks that are doing well with blue-white decks, control decks, are all the Lotus Field versions in Pioneer in the RCQ season that's happening. The other deck that I crafted, of course, I'm a big fan of creativity. I was playing Magma Opus Gear Hulk creativity, which I thought was the best version on Arena because we were lacking the World Spine Worm Xenagos, and then they put both of those cards, World Spine Worm and Xenagos God of Revels, in the same Explorer anthology. So I crafted them. For those of you who don't know, you can, creativity X equals 2, indomitable creativity, and, go get sack 2 tokens, go get the World Spine and the Xenagos, put them on the battlefield, make it a 30-30. I've thought this is the best version of the creativity deck for a long time. Redo won the Pro Tour a couple Pro Tours ago, the last Pioneer Pro Tour, with this exact deck. And I was trying it out on Arena, and it's a little bit different in Explorer. Again, your matchups are different. You're missing Dig Through Time. Usually this deck will play Dig Through Time, one in the main, one on the board, but it was still so powerful, and it feels like, wow, we just got a beefed up version. I think this is the best version, and people ask me why. Why is the World Spine Worm version better than Gear Hulk Opus or better than Atraxa? Some people are creativity into Atraxa, but
you just need one turn. The answer
reality
is that you just need one turn.
Yeah,
if you're a really good player, you don't need these other cards.
Exactly. You cast creativity, you win the game that turn on the spot. That's why it's the best. As soon as if they tap out or whatever, that's it. It's over. I mean, resolving a turn 4 opus is pretty powerful, but that doesn't guaranteed win you the game. Your opponent can get
You
lucky.
can still lose
Maybe
to
you
a board
break.
wipe.
Yeah, stuff like that can happen. So it's, but yeah, so this is the most, so now we've got the most powerful version of creativity. How do you think this, do you think everybody's going to be showing up with this sweet
I
new combo
actually do
deck,
think
or?
that this is going to be a lot more of a popular deck. For my money, this is top 3 decks in the format, probably. I'm actually like a
Yeah.
really big creativity person. Like I don't
Same.
necessarily like play the deck. I have made a lot of videos with the deck recently, but I'm on the bandwagon of like I think this card specifically is like so powerful. I agree with you 100%. I played the deck for YouTube, and I just like I made mistakes, and then I just hard cast Xenagos and made my 5/5 shark a 10/10 and just killed my opponent. And I was like, wow, this deck is
Yeah.
actually broken. I was like it's broken because you just play the pieces. Like you can actually get to a point in the game where you can almost like hard cast World Spine Worm. Like this deck is so crazy. Like I've never seen it. It's so crazy. It has answers, so it can control the game, and then it has 2 win conditions. It can either Indomitable Creativity you, or then it just plays like Kikijiki. And then like once
Well,
Kikijiki
yeah.
comes down, then Kikijiki just takes the game over by itself if you can't answer it. And
Yeah, Fable's still an insane card.
Oh yeah. I think that this is like one of the top 3 decks though in the format, like overall. It doesn't have obviously the highest win percentage. I think it actually was like maybe like a 53-54% or maybe. So maybe this was like one of the tier decks that had the highest, but overall I think that it's top 3 decks. It's so powerful, Damien. Like it is just like you just need one turn. Like I wasn't even playing the deck optimally, and I just like destroyed people. Like it's
I was wrecking people. I mean, even you draw the Xenagos, you draw the nice thing about the worm is, of course, when it's discarded or goes from the graveyard to the graveyard from anywhere, it shuffles back in. So it's so nice, just ditching that worm to your Fable, ditching it to your big score, knowing that it's going right back into your deck to just pull out on the turn when you murder your opponent.
Can't get milled out from Dimir Rogues, which is another deck I talked about.
Oh yeah, right.
Yep.
The only problem I have with Xenagos is that he doesn't shuffle back in. There were a few awkward games where I pull Xenagos and you need to draw Volcanic Spite to put him back in the deck. No other card, because you discard him, he's not coming back. There's no other way to bring him back.
You can cast it though. It's only 1 green, so you can cast it off your
I had
Goblin
to do that
token
a couple
and stuff.
times.
Yeah,
or
it's actually really
Spite,
powerful though. Like it kind of reminds you how powerful Xenagos actually is. Where it's like, yeah, I won the game with that. I hit them for 10 with the shark, and then I made my Goblin token a 4/4, and that's how I killed them. And I was like, wow, like. Any creature plus Xenagos is just like GG. Like if you just control the game enough. Like
the combo package is so lightweight here. You're not having to play 4 Gear Hulk, 4 Magma Opus, like 8 cards. It's just 2 cards. So sideboarding is a snap. You basically just take out Xenagos and World Spine, bring in some Hull Breakers in against other blue decks. Side up. You could easily take it out against aggro. Just bring in a bunch of other stuff, and then you end up beating.
I still
them
played
with
the combo. I'm a madman. I was just like,
Me too.
this mystical dispute. I was like, I play what 3 or 4 mystical disputes. I'm like, yeah, I'll have the mana to just counter their card, but I just win the game. And that happened. I think in the video where like they went for a counter spell, and I was like, mystical dispute, and it's like, oh, I guess I just take 30.
Yeah,
so
I've had a couple.
Guess you do, yeah.
I mean, but again, and this is where Explorer is so weird. Like, I had my World Spine Worm get Vanishing Burst, and I was like, "That's not a card you play. What? Who's playing Vanishing Burst in Pioneer? What is this?" But then, yeah. Anyway, we'll see what happens. I think that's one of the best decks. I agree. I think Blue-White Control is one of the best, but I think Rakdos and Mono Green are so close to their Pioneer counterparts that they are probably still up there as well.
The usually like the most represented.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say it's probably similar to Pioneer. Like we'll see. The top 8 of your tournament should be interesting to see what ends up there. But so I wouldn't be surprised to see those usual suspects.
Yeah, 100%. Something to touch on that I noticed in the article is that there were some decks that were at 60% win rate. I actually shout a few of them out. There's one deck that had over 60% win rate.
Wow.
And is actually what I consider to be one of the best decks as well. And it actually took down one of our tournaments. But I think that there's
what is it?
What was that deck?
Gotta read to find out.
Oh, come on, man. Yeah.
All right, but
dude.
All right, I'll give it away. It was Boros, but Boros Heroic. So Boros Heroic is
interesting. Okay.
Boros Heroic, right? With Pia,
knows how to play against it, and it's just not the Pia one. So it's the Pia one targeting one.
It's the exiling.
No, so this one is actually just straight up. It plays the 2 mana 1/1 that has double strike and connive, and it plays the 2 mana 2/2 that whenever you target it, you get to scry and it gets a counter. So you play those
Mm-hmm.
cards, you play like some of the other hero cards, and essentially like you're playing like this like pseudo infect deck where you play your threat, you protect it, and then your threat becomes like an 8/8, and your opponent can't deal with it, and they just die, and then you give it
Mm-hmm.
like a God's
It's
Willing,
like
you give it
boggles.
protection. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's more
Yeah.
like Boggles. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Because
It's.
I
um,
mean,
it's one of
Mm-hmm.
the
oh
best
yeah, go
decks. I
ahead.
had a 62% win rate. It's actually taken down one of our tournaments before, and it shows up every once in a while. And I think that this is, for my money, another deck that's in the top three. My actual top three decks are going to be Sacrifice, Boros, and Creativity. I think that those are the
Okay.
three best decks in the format. I think that
Interesting.
Boros has a really good game if played correctly against Rakdos decks, like these heavy uh, removal spell decks.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Rakdos Sacrifice is actually like a insane deck when someone like Samsoni
It's very good.
plays
Yeah.
Yeah.
it. And I also think like we talked about like Creativity is like the oops deck where even the most unseasoned player with the deck can kind of like go in and just cast a card and win the game. So
Sure.
I think that these three decks are essentially they're not the pillars of the format. If we're talking pillars, we're talking mono green, Rakdos. But if we're talking like
Okay.
actually like what I think to be the best decks to give you the best chance to win, I think it's going to be those three decks.
Yeah.
The problem is that each one of those decks does something different. Obviously, the combo deck's a little bit more like control. This deck is essentially more like you said, a Boggles aggro deck. And most people play. I've seen a lot of people kind of play these decks wrong, where they play like the Rot Priest turn one, and or they play the Strict Proctor on like turn two,
Mm-hmm.
and you just get to kill those cards,
Yeah.
and then they don't get to pretty much do their combo or do their combo kill.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
I
Right.
think that a lot of these decks really come down to how good you are with it. And Sacrifice is a deck that's like will punish you immediately when you make one wrong,
Oh yeah.
minute
Mhm.
It's
decision. And
resilient. It's got great efficient cards. All of its things are cheap, so you're never like, they're
three
never
mana.
going down on mana
Mm-hmm.
for anything. Yeah, they're 1 mana things, 2 mana things are dealing with your 3-4 mana things. It feels bad that you're always trading down. But I'm surprised about the Boros deck. I know Boros Convoke is kind of the new, or was the new hotness for a little bit in Pioneer. With a couple of the cards from Mom, right? Aftermath, with a couple of the
It's a
cards
really
ended up
good
seeing
deck.
play,
It's
and it is
missing one of the
good.
best cards though. It's missing a Reckless Bushwhacker, which is actually very vital to the deck.
Yeah, and that's
And
huge.
I
Yeah,
also
and
think
the
that
knight.
this deck has
Mm-hmm.
so this is a deck where the most important things about this deck are your mulligan decisions. You need to know how to
Yeah,
mulligan with the deck and have almost the most aggressive start because you can actually cast. So you can go off on like you can actually cast Venerated Loxodon and this card. You can
Mm-hmm.
almost cast this card on turn one.
Knight Errant of
Yeah, the
Eos
Knight
is
Errant of
the
Yeah.
card,
Eos
by
is the
the way.
one we're looking
So
at.
you can
Yep.
almost cast these cards on turn one if you had a white creature out. You could tap that to convoke. So the earliest you can get them out, I guess, is turn two. But essentially,
Mm-hmm.
like you just start out with a super aggressive hand. Your opponent can't. If you're on the play, your opponent doesn't have enough time to Supreme Verdict, and then you wipe them out for like 8 damage a couple turns, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's like the end of the game. I think that deck is a little more glass cannony in that way, but I actually think
Oh
that
yeah,
deck is a legit deck, but
Mm-hmm.
it's very unforgiving even on players who know what to do with the deck because of mulligan decisions and because sometimes you'll just mulligan to five like 3 or 4 matches in a row, and I mean it's hard to sustain a good win percentage when you're consistently starting the game with down
Yeah.
2 cards,
that's
down three
true. And
cards
I
to your
mean,
opponent.
there being a linear strategy like this, there are things that absolutely demolish you. Like I when this deck first showed up on the scene, and then a bunch of the blue-white control decks were scared of losing to it, they started packing main deck temporary lockdown, and a card like that on turn 3 is just lights out against this deck. It just
Mm-hmm.
wipes your entire deck out. So things like that, yeah, you have to know what to play around, and all this kind of stuff. And it's a tricky deck to play, but yeah, what you said, I think we're not going to see this in Explorer simply because they are missing one of the most important cards, like you said. The Bushwhacker is still missing there. It's even like, yeah, some of the other aggressive strategies are still missing a couple pieces from Pioneer, but interesting. I'm curious to see that that other Boros deck you mentioned maybe do some work on the weekend.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
I'm excited.
serious deck.
I'm excited to hear that because I've paired up against it randomly a couple of times on the ladder, and that's one of those where
Okay.
every time by like turn 3, I'm looking at the board going, "How was I ever supposed to keep up with this?"
Yeah.
I can't kill anything they have. It's all gigantic, and yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
wild. So
The
yeah,
fires decks are another deck that I feel like, unfortunately, in a format like Pioneer, being a deck that's playing that many come into play tap lands is a huge liability. Like when everybody else is comboing on 3 or 4 or whatever, like you play against these decks that can just kill you on the play and before you can even play your 4th land. When
mm-hmm.
you're playing off curve, like what the decks are doing are powerful. And if you draw an early ley line and have the perfect, tri lands, you can, ley line on 2 or whatever, and that's great. But Yeah, I think the Karuga decks are really powerful, but I feel like they're not consistent enough.
My
They
my
lack the
fourth best
consistency, you know?
my fourth best deck is probably these
Yeah.
fire decks. So the main reason is
Yeah.
because you do have so you Bone Crusher ties these decks together, Brazen Borrow ties these decks together. Brazen Borrow hasn't played as much, but the real winner that this deck got was Temporary Lockdown. So you essentially can start the game off against these aggressive decks where you stomp, they play a couple things, you temporary lockdown. Then now you can play your Fires of Invention. If you're playing Enigmatic, you can play Enigmatic and then immediately go get your Tolsimir, which then that
Right.
wolf token will fight with one of their cards. And then you can kind of start to go off with, let's say, Yorion, if you're playing those versions where you kind of start to blank your cards, or Karuga, where you start to draw a bunch more cards. And I actually think that these decks go over the top of every deck in the format. I don't think that
Oh
there's a
yeah.
deck when this deck has enough time that can beat this deck. And when I played it in the videos, I actually played against I think 2 control decks. And like the longer the game went on, the longer I was like, I can't lose. I was like, I'm gonna play Karuga and I'm gonna draw 4 cards, and that's just like a track style. I'm like, I can't lose. And that's pretty much what would happen. Or I would, start the Enigmatic Incarnation. I would start to chain that out. I get like
Yeah.
the Elish Norn Mom, and I would just kind of like double my triggers and just do all these crazy things. And I
Yeah.
actually think
Once the
that these
deck.
decks like are also another deck that relies on mulligan decisions. But I actually think that
Yeah.
even though in the matchups that this deck might seem bad against, which is going to be like these high aggressive decks, I actually think that this deck has game against all of them. And something that these Karuga decks have actually been playing recently, I believe, is Thought Distortion is what the card's called. It's
Oh
a
yeah.
card
On
where
the
they
sideboard.
discard
I
every
love thought distortion. Yeah.
non-creature
Yep.
card in their hand. And there were
It's
games
can't
where
be
my
countered.
opponent,
Is the
yeah, it
important
can be
part.
countered. Yeah, and my opponent would Atraxa, and I would just cast it.
Yeah.
And they would be like, "Oh, I guess I
So
guess I lose all my cards."
as a
It's like,
blue
yeah.
white control player, it's why I pack Narset's Reversal in the sideboard when I play against Karuga's
Yep.
the Karuga decks. I know they're bringing in Thought Distortion, and I bring in Narset's Reversal. And let me tell you, there's not many sweeter feelings in Magic than reversing a Thought Distortion, going back
That
to
is-
their hand, and then they have to discard it.
That is
Sad,
beautiful, and it's funny you say that because as somebody who's more of a mid-range player, I thought there was no better feeling
Yeah.
than watching an Azorius control player's hand evaporate after I cast Thought Distortion. But fair enough.
Not against me, baby. Watch out. Come,
That's great
Narset's
tech. I
coming for
dig
you.
it.
You
I
get to
dig
do it for free
Um,
in this deck because of the Fires Invention. But
Yeah, you
I
can
actually
cheat,
think that this
yeah.
is one of the best decks. This deck has gotten, I think, to the finals and also won. And it's also a consistent deck that our good friend
You're-
Sandoish actually plays in the Pizza Box events. And for my money, I think it's the 4th best deck, and it's actually very, very underplayed. It is probably one of the most like tier 1
mean,
underrepresented decks.
That's something we didn't touch on, but that's a real factor in Arena that is not a factor in real life, or less of a factor anyway, which is not card availability, but rare availability. Like when you're talking about a deck like Karuga Fires, it's all rares. The mana base is all rares except one basic land. The creatures and the spells, literally every card in this deck is a rare. Almost actually, I'm looking at the list now. I think it's literally every single. Oh, Touch the Spirit Realm ×3 is an uncommon. Everything else is rare or mythic. So a lot of players want to play decks like this, but especially if you're newer to Arena and you're not willing to put hundreds of dollars in to open a bunch of packs or whatever. And again, these Explorer anthologies aren't giving you all of these things; they're giving you 1 or 2 of these cards. It leads to less players playing it. I wonder if that's a factor. Like, there's maybe less players picking up decks like this just because they're more expensive to build on Arena. I don't know. I don't know how much
It
of a
is
factor
actually
that is
so.
in the
That has to
metagame.
be.
I think it's a
Yeah.
combination of that
Yeah.
and Red Deck used to actually be one of the best decks in the format. And Red Deck's actually definitely fallen off a bit recently, and I think that alone lets you know that in the format you have to kind of be an enfranchised player on Arena. And what it really comes down to,
Yeah.
I think, with Explorer specifically is how much of like a paper player are you? If you're a paper player, then you're probably going to want to play Explorer because it's pretty as close as it's going to get to actual Pioneer testing on Arena that you can do. So I think that between all these factors, I think that that's kind of what makes Explorer different, and the fact that you're right, it doesn't mirror Pioneer, even though there's decks that are very close, and you would think that those would be the best decks, but in reality, they're really good decks, but they're not the best. And I think
Yeah.
that that's like really cool, and I think that one thing that I do like about the fact that there's not enough of the cards that are necessary to make it Pioneer is that we do get to see a lot of these different decks. I get to write an article about like 25 plus different decks, where maybe before it's like, okay, if we want to talk about Modern, it's like, all right, well, here's 10 decks. Here's like the 10 best decks, and then there's like 35 other decks that people play. Whereas like here, it's like some of the decks that just people play are actually like tiered decks that you do see every once in a while on the ladder, and you'll lose to just because they know what they're doing and you haven't played against that matchup enough. And
Yeah.
once again, this format, like any format, is essentially going to come down to matchups and how well you know the card pool. If you know the card pool and you keep up with essentially like either content creators or you keep up with these websites that show you deck lists, as soon as you'll see it on my stream. As soon as I get paired up against someone, I see the deck and I'm like, oh, they're probably playing this version from MTGA Zone. And it's like, oh yeah, they're playing it because they're playing these 2 cards that obviously don't normally get played in the deck. And I'll see them and all this stuff. It's like, okay, so yeah, I know that this came from this website, or I know, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's actually kind of like funny and interesting that in real life you don't see that because there's not a consistent queue to play Magic. Whereas in Arena, you have more of the opportunity to see all these decks because everyone's playing Magic like 24/7.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wondered if they have a big Explorer tournament for a lot of money and suddenly there's an incentive for actual pro players and grinders to play Explorer. I wonder how that would change. We would very quickly see which decks are the best decks. Like it would get distilled down very quickly. Right now it's like just there is no accurate picture of there is no metagame. There's just what you see on the ladder, a little bit of like your tournament is one, but it's just one event. I mean, and it doesn't even happen every week. So it's not, there's things happening between these tournaments all the time. And when you have weekly tournaments going on, like actual Pioneer, it's very easy to see these minute changes and decks, shifting direction. But in Explorer, it's impossible to follow any of this. So yeah, it's really kind of the Wild West. I mean, there's so many decks we didn't even touch on, Abzan, Greasefang, and other decks that, you need Graveyard Hate, you need Artifact Hate, you need Combo Hate, you need... Yeah, like I think you're probably still better off for somebody out there who's listening to this, who's thinking of playing Explorer this weekend, maybe in Hollywood's tournament, which you should, because again, it's free and just you should go for it. But what deck should you play? Play something like you were saying, Hollywood, something consistently powerful, either a combo deck if you can afford to craft it, whether it's a graveyard based deck like Greasefang, or a really aggressive version like this, the Boros Convoke deck, or Creativity, or Karuga. Like a lot of these decks almost feel like combo decks. A lot of them are very engine built kind of around a certain engine, and when they do their thing, it's impossible for other decks to really compete with. Pick some deck like that, mono green, obviously Rakdos. You can never go wrong. They're so close to their Pioneer versions that we just they're powerful. It's been proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that shell is powerful. Play that blue-red, the blue-red shell, whether it's Creativity or whether it's Worldspine or it's Torrential Gear Hulk Magma Opus, that shell has proven to be good as well. So
I've seen some people out there using like Sage of the Falls and Locust God. I mean, there's a lot of 2-card combos that can come together to get you where you need to go. So it's interesting. You can get creative with the Creativity deck. It's kind of anyway.
Nice.
So to kind of like end the Explorer conversation here, I'm just going to touch on 2 decks that I actually talked about here that are new decks in the format. It's going to be Grixis Midrange and Celestia Midrange. So Grixis is actually a deck that we've seen obviously in Standard. This is pretty much these classic Nicol Bolas decks that can't ever really get over the top. But in Explorer, these decks have an over 50% win rate, and we see them in the tournaments. I know Cushwood is someone who plays the Snowman. If you've seen him on stream, he plays these decks a lot, and I actually think that the version that we have in the article is really good because it also plays Fires of Invention, which is normally a card you don't see in the Grixis decks. And so you can like do a Fires of Invention plus like a Fable, and then next turn you can go Invoke Despair plus Nicol Bolas, and then your opponent just loses the game. On top of that, what's really interesting about this deck that I haven't seen before, at least to my knowledge, is this Mirror Shell Crab. So you can channel this card, so you can still use the ability on this card even when it's not your turn and you have Fires of Invention out. Normally you still can adventure and do these instant speed things. Well, you can still channel. So the fact that you can still counter your opponent's spells even when you have a Fires of Invention out is pretty nuts, because a lot of the time your opponent is not going to be ready for you to counter their spell when you have Fires out, so they'll tap out more than likely or missequence their spells,
Yeah.
Wait. Oh, you mean you play the spell on your turn, then actually pay the mana on their turn to channel it?
Yeah. No, you don't get it for free, but you can do it at instant speed, which is normally something you would
leave
can't
up.
do.
You don't get it for free, but most of the time in the Invention decks, the only time you're spending your mana is on cycle lands or on your own turn. So most of the time you're going to pass with a lot of untapped mana, and
you don't have much to do with it in this deck.
Yeah,
no Kenrith, no
Shark Typhoon's a great choice too, because Shark Typhoon cycles.
Interesting.
And what's also interesting is this deck plays Fae of Wishes. So what's really cool is that this deck essentially has answers for any deck. What we notice in the sideboard of this deck is that there's a ton of ultimatums. So essentially this deck is really trying to go off hard with the Fires of Adventure, where later in the game this deck is really going to go over the top no matter what you do, because it's either going to ruin us ultimatum your permanents, it's going to play Inspired Ultimatum and draw a bunch of
gain
cards,
life,
Genesis,
and
put a bunch of permanents in, or it could also just get
tracks
like
up.
any of the answers. Yeah, it can get a negate, a go for the
Breach.
throat, disdainful stroke. Yeah, it can get a breach to multiverse. Like this version specifically is an interesting version, but I think that this is where the Grixis decks and maybe even other mid-range red-based decks could go, just because Fires of Invention is just such a powerful card that it almost doesn't matter that you don't get to play on your opponent's turn, because you're doing so much powerful things that your opponent has no choice but to play on their turn just to try to stop you. And I think that these decks are just the Fires decks are just really powerful. Celestia Midrange is another deck. It's very close to like a Grilled Boats. It's just like a mid-rangey attack your opponent to death deck. The latest addition to the deck is Voice of Surgeons. So someone was actually playing this in Pioneer. This deck did really, really good. Ash Morgan. Not sure if I'm saying their name wrong, but Ash Morgan's deck did really good in Pioneer, and then Jaffer played it in a YouTube video and played it in real life as well. So they both obviously believe in the deck, and both of them said that it's potentially better than the Girl deck. So it's going to be
playing 8 elves, ramping. Looks interesting, yeah.
Malira is an interesting choice because Malira protects your chariot. It protects your Yasharn if you need your Yasharn out of the sideboard, which we know Yasharn's great against like decks like Sacrifice, things like that. You also have a card that we normally see in Standard in Steel Seraph, and you're not scamming it out per se. And I think that that's actually really interesting, where later in the game, I actually mentioned this in the article, both the Gruul Boats deck and the Celestia deck are both essentially either trying to get a chariot or a big flyer to kind of bridge that mid to late game and end the game in like a swift manner. Obviously, the only difference in this deck is that there's no burn for reach, so that could definitely come up sometimes where your opponent's at 2 life and you literally just can't kill them. Yeah. But overall, what I really like about this deck is we see Dromoga's Command, which is a card we haven't seen in a while, one of my old favorites. And we also see Invasion of Gobakhan. Invasion of Gobakhan makes so many of these decks viable because it actually gives you like this disruption that you don't normally have against Farewells and other cards that give you that one extra turn you need just to finish killing the opponent. And I think that maybe this deck's definitely a player. I say in the article, give it some time. Maybe we'll see if either of these decks or both of these decks fall flat. But it's going to be interesting if we actually see these decks in the tournament, because if we do see these decks in specifically Celestia, because it's more of a new deck, if we see Celestia in the tournament, it's going to be interesting if it does good because people haven't played against it before. And so that's definitely something to watch out for.
I think it's very, very clearly made to beat Rakdos. That's obvious. It looks like it's made to counter tons of spot removal out of decks like black and red based decks. I mean, you've got Invasion flipping is amazing. Dromoga's Command, Malira, even Voice of Resurgence bringing your stuff back. Like, it's very resilient to spot removal. So I could see this deck being good. If you're expecting a lot of Rakdos in your metagame, I imagine a deck like this is good. Cool. Yeah, interesting stuff. I wonder what's going to happen this Sunday.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. But the kind of the bottom line, it sounds like no matter what style you're interested in, there are folks out there putting up wins in Explorer with a deck like that. If you're a control player, there are variants, there are options. Mid-range players, aggro players, combo players. There's all kinds of good stuff. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens there. So, with that, I suppose looking at the time, we've gone a little bit longer than we had necessarily planned, but thank you, gentlemen, for the conversation. Love it. No, you're good. Well, we all love this game, and we all have that one more thought every time. I get it. I absolutely do as well. All good. It's good stuff. Yeah. So, let's go ahead and let people know where they can find it. So, like, Damien, starting with you, where can people find you on the internet? What can they expect to find when they get there?
You can find me. I won't be Xing. I don't X any at all really these days. I'm on YouTube and I'm on Twitch, Damien F16. I'm there Monday to Saturday. I'm there every day, almost just one day off. So anytime you want to pop in, show me deck lists, hang out, whatever, it's great. And then YouTube, I've got a bunch of non-Magic content, which is awesome as well. So big gamer, not just Magic, but everything else. Join us.
Love it. And Pizza, what about you? What about you, good sir?
So, I'm pretty much ready here for the weekend. I'm excited for everything that everyone's going to be like, kind of like involving themselves in, and kind of just like, it's crazy. It feels like every week, like I've gotten like so used. I'm like almost like desensitized to like these big weekends because it happens so much that it's like, oh yeah, here comes another big thing, or the next thing, so on and so forth. And It's so awesome. Like there's so many awesome things for us to like kind of like look forward to between like the tournaments we do, between all these other events, between just hanging out with people on our Twitch streams, and then our culmination here when we get to MagicCon Vegas. And I think that all this is just like so phenomenal. I'm ready for just a really good
stuff,
time
man.
with everyone, and just like I'm just ready. I'm so ready, guys. Like
Absolutely.
I can't wait to hang out with you again, Ham, and I can't wait to meet
100%,
Damien, and just like
Can't wait.
it's just so cool. It's we're so lucky that we get to play this game, and
Absolutely.
we get so lucky to be here in these positions to kind of like get to talk about it and have fun. So
Definitely. But yeah, so this weekend there's a ton of great Magic going on. We have the Pro Tour, so we have the Modern Pro Tour, so definitely that's going to be a delight. And then we have the Explorer Tournament on twitch.tv/HollywoodPizza. Definitely drop a follow over there so you can get notified as soon as that goes live. I hear the coverage over there is pretty darn good. Just saying.
We got some pretty handsome commentators, out there in the world.
Some of the
So
finest in the biz. I'm not biased at all. I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, so we got that coming up. It's gonna be super fun. I stream on Twitch as well, twitch.tv/Hamox42. I'm also on the YouTubes, and I'm on the app formerly known as Twitter. From time to time, sharing random thoughts and whatnot. But yeah, if you, dear viewer, listener, want to get in on the conversation, we actually have a Discord server that is wide open. Feel free to jump on in there. And we do have a channel dedicated to podcast questions. If there are any topics that you want to hear us discuss or any questions that you have, please go ahead and drop them in there or send us a tweet or an X or whatever we're calling them now, tagging @MagicJank, and use the hashtag #JankMail so we can make sure to find that before we go live. So yeah,
we would love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Please,
yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. Like, give us some topics. Anything that you think that you want us to talk about in the Magic Sphere.
Yeah,
definitely go find it out.
Every week when you're like, man, I can't believe those guys didn't talk about blah, let us know and we'll talk about it next week. Yeah, we'd really appreciate it.
Don't forget to check out all of our YouTube channels too. We all make just so much content. Like besides, like combine all of us, it's like YouTube, streaming, articles, podcasts. We do put so much content out there, and the number one thing is it's free. You have to remember, you're not paying for this. There's a lot of things out there, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there's a lot of things out there that are paywalled. Let's say you can't afford that. Well, we're here to provide you some free, genuine content that's still going to give you just as much of an edge as some other content may give you as well. So overall, definitely check out our website, MagicJank.com, and definitely check out all of our content, because we put out just some straight fire content as a team, and we're just going out there and just janking it up.
You know it.
Thank you,
Papa
Hollywood.
Yeah, I'm about to say, I love it, dude. But yes. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and bid you all a very fond adieu. And we will be back next week. So thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Stay cheesy. Be safe.